Alleluia, Alleluia. Everybody sing Alleluia, for the Lord has risen, it is true. Everybody sing Alleluia. 30 years he walked the land. Alleluia, Alleluia. To all in need he lent his hand. Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. Everybody sing.
In the last installment on this playlist, we discussed Pope Honorius II. And I'd like to insert a video at this point in the playlist about Pope Anastasius II, who reigned as pontiff from the years 496 to 498. And though Pope Anastasius preceded Pope Honorius, it probably makes most sense to discuss him here after Honorius. Anastasius became pope at a point in history after an individual named Acacius, who had been the ambitious patriarch of Constantinople, had generated still another schism over the nature of Christ. Acacius, who is now not very well thought of by Catholics, the Orthodox, or even the Copts, tried to generate a compromise with the Monophysites, who nowadays are embodied by the Copts. We discussed the Robert Council earlier in another installment on this playlist, and I have that link down below. Before Pope Anastasius became pope, his predecessor, Pope Felix, had excommunicated Acacius for Acacius's compromise with the Monophysites. And unfortunately, the excommunication was pretty much ignored in the East, and by Acacius, of course, himself. Pope Felix and Acacius died, and then Pope Anastasius became pope. And despite Pope Felix's prior condemnation and excommunication of Acacius, when Anastasius became pope, he sought a compromise with the remaining factor of Acacius. Anastasius sent a letter to the Byzantine emperor saying that he was willing to accept the baptisms that had been performed by Acacius, and he suggested that they should just let the issue of dogma be decided by time and by God rather than by the church authorities. Nowadays, moderns would applaud this action of Pope Anastasius as a good thing. They would applaud his ecumenism. However, before the Second Vatican Council, Catholics seemed to have keener intellects and saw ecumenism and related things, like seeking compromise with heretics, as actually bad things. They understood that compromising with heretics on basic theological matters is compromising with evil. According to Liber Pontificalis, or Book of the Popes, which is a relatively ancient biography of the early popes, at that time many of the clergy and the priests withdrew themselves from communion with him, meaning Pope Anastasius II, because without consulting the priests or the bishops or the clergy of all the Catholic Church, he had communicated with a deacon of Thessalonica, Photinus by name, who was of the party of Acacius, and because he desired secretly to reinstate Acacius and could not, and he was struck dead by divine will. So, by giving communion to a seeming heretic, Anastasius was struck dead by divine will. There is some dispute over how Acacius actually died. Some say he died of leprosy, and others write that he died in the same manner as Arius, ignobly, while he moved his bowels. Later, Dante, in his poem The Divine Comedy, suggested that Anastasius II was in the sixth circle of hell, and he wrote, "I guard Pope Anastasius, he whom Photinus drew from the straight path." Of the first 50 popes, Anastasius is only one of 2 popes not to be canonized. And nowadays there's some historical revisionism, which only recently appeared that Liber Pontificalis and Dante confused Pope Anastasius with Emperor Anastasius, who bore the same name. And this revisionism is due to modern sensibilities that are sympathetic to Pope Anastasius's ecumenism. The revisionists are confused over the resistance to it, and they're applying modern post-Vatican II sentimentalities to a preconciliar world. In an attempt to rehabilitate Anastasius, moderns try to redirect his condemnations, saying that they were addressed to the emperor, and they ignore that those condemnations are nonsensical if they're made against the secular ruler. In other videos, I mentioned Gratian, who was a canon lawyer in the 1100s, and he compiled canon law into a textbook. And that was used universally throughout the whole Catholic Church for canon law. And what was included in his compilation was considered to be canon law. Just as Gratian quoted decretals of various popes, he also quoted Liber Pontificalis, and he wrote, "At that time many of the clerics and priests withdrew themselves from communion with him," meaning Pope Anastasius II, "because, apart from the council of bishops, priests, and clergy of the whole Catholic Church, he was in communion with a deacon of Thessalonica, Photinus, who was in communion with Acacius. And because he secretly wanted to rehabilitate Acacius, but could not, he was smitten by the divine command. So Gratian inserted this into the historic canon law, and though this was not specifically retained in future compilations of codes, it's still in force. Canon law cannot be changed outside of disciplinary matters. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the ultimate source of canon law is God, whose will is manifested either by the very nature of things, meaning natural divine law, or by revelation, positive divine law. The Church accepts and considers both as sovereign binding laws, which it can interpret but cannot modify. This is Christian divine law, if we may so call it, and it's found in the Gospels and the apostolic writings and the living tradition which transmits laws as well as dogmas. On this positive divine law depend the essential principles of the Church's constitution, the primacy, etc. I should note that the Church never formally condemned Anastasius as a heretic, but what Gratian lays out for us in the historic canon law is the manner in which we must treat a seemingly heretical pope. Such a pope is to be shunned and resisted. This includes refusing to accept communion from such a pope. Are there any modern bishops or cardinals that would have enough strength of will to refuse communion from a heretical pope? I'd like to add that there's a certain elegance to sedevacantism. Sedevacantists hold that the Church can't be tainted by a heretical pope. And I'd probably be a sedevacantist myself, but I just can't get around the fact that history shows us that with Pope Honorius II, we have had a heretical pope. And also the historic canon law tells us how we should treat such a pope. Many writers have tried to explain Pope Honorius II away, but to my knowledge, nobody's done it effectively. And I'm not trying to pick a fight with sedevacantists. WCB Ohio is one of my favorite YouTube channels, and Father Chicada's playlist, The Work of Human Hands, just might be the best playlist on YouTube, and I've cited it in some of my videos. I don't think that the divisiveness between traditional Catholics is particularly helpful, and I'm just trying to explain my own position. I also acknowledge that there are some good arguments for sedevacantism, and without a doubt, we're experiencing something that is unprecedented in its depth, scope, and duration. Neither side should be condemned, because as faithful Catholics, we're living in an extraordinary time, and we must muddle through it to the best of our abilities. But I just can't get around Pope Honorius II. We've had a heretical pope, and he remained a pope, and that's just what it is. Well, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I'll be back again in about a week with another one, but in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page, which is linked down below. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel, and please, pray for the Church.